The moment Jenny slid the warm plate across the table, she knew the boy would never ask why. That was their unspoken agreement. She provided food he desperately needed, and he provided her with something she couldn't name but felt in her bones. Purpose, maybe. In this forgotten Kansas diner with its cracked vinyl seats and perpetually steaming coffee, they were two islands of loneliness finding brief connection. Neither could have imagined how their quiet ritual would collide with the outside world that morning when the military vehicles pulled into the gravel lot, followed by the gleaming midnight blue Lamborghini that seemed to belong to another universe entirely. The man who stepped from it, worth billions and haunted by his own ghosts, would transform their lives forever. But transformation rarely comes without pain, and some truths, once spoken, cannot be unheard. Nobody was ready for what would happen next. Jenny's alarm went off at 4:15 a.m., though she was already awake. Sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford, not in hours, anyway. The ancient radiator in her apartment clanged and wheezed but produced barely enough heat to keep the pipes from freezing. She'd learned to sleep in layers, thermal shirt, flannel, and the old quilt her father had brought back from his single deployment before the cancer took him. The linoleum floor was ice against her bare feet as she shuffled to the bathroom. The mirror revealed what she already knew: dark circles beneath eyes that had once been bright. 29 going on 50, her aunt would say. The thought brought a familiar pang. Her aunt's Christmas card, propped against a chipped mug on her dresser, showed palm trees and smiling faces. A world away from Kansas in winter. 20 minutes, Jenny whispered to herself. That's all she allowed for self-pity. 20 minutes each morning to feel the weight of her loneliness, to acknowledge the crushing sameness of her days, and then it was time to function. The walk to Rosie's diner took 12 minutes, 17 if the sidewalks hadn't been shoveled. Today they weren't. Her breath formed clouds in the pre-dawn darkness as she trudged past darkened storefronts: Harmon's Hardware with its rusted garden tools displayed year-round, the Suds and Save laundromat with its flickering fluorescent sign. Main Street, USA, dying in slow motion. Inside Rosie's, the familiar smell of coffee and frying grease greeted her. The place hadn't been updated since 1983. Wood-paneled walls, red vinyl booths worn to the foam in spots, a counter with spinning stools where the chrome was more memory than reality. It wasn't much, but it was steady. Steady mattered when your life existed on the financial knife's edge. Morning, Jenny. Kathy, 60-something with cigarette-weathered skin, was already manning the grill. She'd opened since the Reagan administration and had the ankles to prove it. Jenny tied her apron, once blue, now a washed-out gray, and began the ritual. Fill the sugar dispensers. Check the ketchup bottles. Wipe down menus sticky from yesterday's syrup. The rhythm of it was almost comforting. Harold arrived first, same as always. Retired postal worker with arthritic hands and stories Jenny had memorized but still pretended were new. Weather's turning, he'd say, like it was a revelation and not the same observation he'd made every November morning for the past 3 years. But it was the Tuesday in early October that changed everything. The boy arrived at precisely 7:15, a coincidence at first, then a pattern too consistent to ignore. Small 9, maybe 10, with careful eyes that darted toward exits. His backpack was comically large against his frame, like he was setting out on a journey rather than heading to school. He chose the same booth every time, the one with the clear view of both the door and the parking lot. Just water, please, he said the first time, voice soft but deliberate. Jenny brought the water with a smile that reached her eyes, a genuine one, unlike the smile she offered the men who ordered the hungry man's special and let their gaze linger too long on her hips. She watched him over the following days, concern growing like a physical ache in her chest. He was always alone. Always reading. Always watching. Always hungry, though he never ordered food. On the 15th day, she couldn't stand it anymore. Kitchen accidentally made extra pancakes, she lied, setting the steaming plate before him. They'll just go to waste otherwise. She saw the battle in his eyes, pride warring with hunger before he offered the slightest nod. When she returned later, the plate was wiped clean, though he never once looked up from his book. "Thank you," he whispered, and something in Jenny's chest cracked open. "Who's the kid?" Harold asked one morning, gesturing with his coffee mug toward the corner booth where the boy sat with his book and a plate of extra eggs Jenny had brought him. "Don't know," Jenny admitted, refilling Harold's cup. "But he's hungry." Kathy cornered her in the storage room later, arms crossed over her ample chest. "You can't save every stray that wanders in," she said, but her eyes held no malice, only the weariness of someone who had seen good intentions paved over too many times. "You give handouts, they never learn to fend for themselves." Jenny stacked cans of peaches with more force than necessary. "He's a child, Kathy. And I used to be that hungry." The admission hung in the air between them, more personal information than Jenny had shared in 3 years of working side by side. Kathy's expression softened before she turned away, muttering something about inventory that they both knew was an excuse to end the conversation. What no one at the diner knew was how Jenny counted out her tip money each night on her scratched kitchen table, separating coins into small piles: rent, electricity, bus fare, boys' breakfast. Some nights the piles were so meager she wanted to weep, but tears didn't pay bills. She'd cancelled her internet months ago. Her phone was prepaid, emergency only. The dentist's appointment for her aching molar had been rescheduled 3 times now. The boy she wished she knew his name never volunteered information, and something in his demeanor warned against questions. The careful way he scanned the diner each morning, how he positioned himself in the booth, back to the wall, eyes on the door, it spoke of wariness beyond his years. So instead of questions, she offered consistency. Warm food. Small smiles. A safe harbor for 40 minutes each day. Across town, in an office that occupied the entire top floor of the only high-rise building within 50 miles, Maxwell Reed overlooked quarterly projections with weary eyes. At 42, he had accomplished everything on the list he'd made as a hungry 12-year-old, become rich enough to never worry about money, current net worth, $4.2 billion, build something that mattered, Reed Technologies now employed over 30,000 people, prove everyone who doubted him wrong. The Wall Street Journal profile last month had done that nicely. So why did success taste like ashes in his mouth? He swiveled his chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the town he'd escaped and then, inexplicably, returned to. His executive team thought he was crazy to relocate their headquarters here. "There's nothing in Millfield," his CFO had argued. Exactly, Max had thought but didn't say. He reached for the framed photograph on his desk, the only personal item in the otherwise minimalist space. A woman with kind eyes and work-roughened hands, wearing a faded dress and a butterfly brooch. His mother. Gone now, but her voice still echoed in his head. "Remember where you came from, Maxwell. Remember the hunger." He had. Every successful venture, every acquisition, every decision to expand had been fueled by the memory of that hunger, not just for food, though there had been plenty of nights when the cabinets held nothing but crackers and hope, but for security. For certainty. For the knowledge that tomorrow wouldn't bring another eviction notice, another utility shut off, another night of watching his mother weep silently at the kitchen table over bills she couldn't pay. What would she think of him now? Of the Lamborghini Aventador in his private garage, the penthouse in New York he visited twice a year, the watches worth more than most houses in this town? He ran his thumb over her photograph, trying to recall the scent of her drugstore perfume. His phone buzzed. Another notification from that local Facebook group he followed anonymously, his private way of keeping tabs on the town he'd abandoned and then returned to conquer. Usually, it was mundane, complaints about potholes, announcements for church bake sales, passive-aggressive comments about teenagers loitering at the 7-Eleven. But today's post made his blood run cold. Someone had photographed an empty booth at Rosie's Diner with a plate of untouched food. The caption mocked the waitress playing charity worker and her imaginary charity case. The comments were worse: cruel, dismissive, smug. Max knew that booth. Knew that diner. And suddenly, with perfect clarity, he knew what his mother would have him do. Mark Lowry prided himself on running a tight ship. 22 years managing Rosie's Diner, and his books always balanced to the penny. So when he noticed the pattern, Jenny Williams giving food to that skinny kid who never ordered anything, his first instinct was irritation. Giving away product. Setting a bad precedent. The kind of bleeding heart nonsense that didn't belong in business. "Need to see you in my office," he told Jenny during a rare lull in the morning rush. His office was barely more than a closet desk crammed against filing cabinets, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, air heavy with the scent of old coffee and the menthol rub he used for his bad knee. Jenny stood with her hands twisted in her apron, a gesture that reminded Mark suddenly, uncomfortably, of his own daughter when she was younger. "You can't keep giving food away," he said, more gruffly than intended. "Not how businesses work." "I know." Jenny's voice was soft but not weak. "I've been paying for it myself." "From my tips?" Mark leaned back, genuinely surprised. "Your tips? Those barely cover your bus fare." Something flickered across Jenny's face: pride, maybe, or determination. "It's my choice, Mark. One meal a day. I can make it work." Looking at her, really looking, maybe for the first time, Mark saw the shadows beneath her eyes, the way her uniform hung a little looser than it had last year, the small economy of her movements, like someone who had calculated the energy cost of every gesture and found ways to conserve. "Why?" The question escaped before he could stop it. "You don't even know the kid." Jenny's gaze dropped to her hands, knuckles white where they gripped the worn fabric of her apron. "My dad died when I was 15. Mom followed 2 years later. There was a teacher, Mrs. Grayson, who accidentally packed extra lunches 3 days a week. She never said anything, just left them on my desk when no one was looking." Her eyes met his, steady now. "I'm just paying it forward." Mark felt something in his chest shift uncomfortably. Damn it. He'd rehearsed this conversation in his head, firm but fair, all business. Now Jenny had gone and made it human. "Fine," he said finally. "But if it affects your work or if that kid causes any trouble." "He won't," Jenny said with such certainty that Mark wondered what she saw in that silent boy that he didn't. The next Thursday, the boy didn't show. Jenny kept glancing at the door, a furrow between her brows deepening as the morning wore on. She made a plate of pancakes anyway, setting it at his empty booth. Friday came and went. Then a week. Jenny still prepared a plate each morning, though she now wrapped it up and took it with her at the end of her shift. Kathy, passing by with a bus tub full of dirty dishes, shook her head. "Told you," she said, not unkindly. "Strays don't stick around." By the 10th day of the boy's absence, whispers had started, customers pointing at the empty booth, the occasional phone raised to snap a photo. Jenny felt their eyes like physical weight, heard their murmured comments cut off when she approached. That night, alone in her apartment, she checked the local Facebook page and felt her stomach clench. Someone had posted a photo of the empty booth with its waiting plate, Rosie's Diner now serving imaginary charity cases. #performative kindness, #attention seeking. The comments were worse. Publicity stunt. That waitress needs a reality check. Nobody does something for nothing. What's her angle? Probably some welfare queen teaching her kid to expect handouts. Jenny had never considered herself vulnerable to strangers' opinions, but the cruelty of these comments stung with unexpected ferocity. She closed her laptop, hands shaking slightly, and crossed to the small wooden box on her dresser, the only item of real value she owned. Inside lay a faded photograph of her father in desert fatigues, his medic's patch visible on his sleeve. Beside it was the small leather journal he'd kept during his deployment, the pages worn from her frequent handling. She opened it to a dog-eared page, reading words she'd memorized years ago. "Shared half my ration with a local kid today. Johnson said I'm a fool, that the kid might be working for insurgents. Maybe. But hunger looks the same in every language. No man grows poor by giving, but those who refuse to share remain hungry their whole lives." Her father's handwriting, strong and sure, anchored her. She traced the words with her fingertip, feeling a sudden clarity. It didn't matter if the boy never returned. It didn't matter what strangers on Facebook thought. What mattered was that for several weeks, she had seen hunger and responded with bread, not questions. And she would do it again tomorrow, and the day after, for whoever needed it. The Facebook notification on her phone interrupted her thoughts. Another comment on the post about her charity case. This one different from the others. "Some of you have forgotten what it means to be human. I haven't. And I'm coming home to remind you." The comment was from a profile she didn't recognize, Max Reed. But something about the name tugged at her memory, like a melody half remembered from childhood. Dawn broke cold and clear on the 23rd day of the boy's absence. Jenny arrived at the diner with frost clinging to her coat and resignation settled heavy in her chest. The habit of looking toward the door at 7:15 remained, but the sharp anticipation had dulled to a quiet ache. She prepared a small plate of pancakes anyway, muscle memory guiding her hands. Mark watched from the pass-through window but said nothing. Even Kathy's usual barbed comments had softened to something like concern. At precisely 9:17 a.m., the atmosphere in the diner shifted. Jenny felt it first as a strange silence, the absence of clinking silverware and murmured conversations. Looking up from the coffee pot, she saw her customers frozen in mid-motion, their gazes fixed on something outside the window. 4 black SUVs with government plates had pulled into the small parking lot, arranging themselves in a semicircle with military precision. Men in uniforms emerged, standing at attention beside each vehicle. The sight would have been surreal anywhere, in their sleepy town, it was practically apocalyptic. Then came the sound, a deep, throaty growl of an engine that didn't belong to any pickup truck or sedan that frequented their streets. A midnight blue Lamborghini Aventador, gleaming like a predator in the morning sun, pulled alongside the government vehicles, the incongruity so stark it seemed almost deliberate. Jenny's coffee pot hovered forgotten above a customer's cup. The diner had fallen so completely silent she could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. The door opened first to admit a man whose bearing commanded attention before his uniform did, tall, weathered, with the ramrod posture of someone who had spent a lifetime standing at attention. The ribbons and medals on his chest caught the light as he removed his cap, scanning the diner with eyes that missed nothing. Behind him came another figure, younger, in a suit that even Jenny, who knew nothing about men's fashion, could tell cost more than her yearly salary. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who had never wondered if there would be enough money for groceries at the end of the week. Mark emerged from the back, straightening his tie nervously. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The uniformed man stepped forward. "I'm looking for someone who works here." "A woman named Jenny." Every head turned toward her. Jenny set down the coffee pot before her trembling hands could betray her anxiety. "I'm Jenny," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her voice. "Jenny Millers." The officer studied her with an intensity that made her want to shrink into herself. She nodded. "My name is Colonel David Reeves, United States Army Special Forces Command." He reached inside his uniform jacket and withdrew an envelope, crisp and official looking. "I'm here because of a promise made to one of my men." The suited man stepped forward then, his presence somehow filling the space without crowding it. "And I'm Maxwell Reed," he said, his voice deep and resonant. Something about the name tugged at Jenny's memory. "I believe we have a mutual friend." "I'm sorry," Jenny said, confusion evident in her voice. "I don't understand." Colonel Reeves' expression softened slightly. "The boy," he said. "Adam Thompson. The one you've been feeding these past months." The name hit Jenny like a physical blow. Adam. The quiet boy had a name. A history. People who knew him. "Is he okay?" The question burst from her, urgent and fearful. "He's safe," the colonel assured her. "He's with his grandparents in Colorado now. But for almost 3 months, he came here every morning before school after his father was deployed on a classified operation." The suited man Maxwell Reed moved closer, and for the first time, Jenny noticed the compassion in his eyes. "When I saw that Facebook post mocking your kindness," he said quietly, "I knew I had to come. But Colonel Reeves contacted me first, for a very different reason." Colonel Reeves extended the envelope toward her. "This is a letter from the Commanding General of Special Forces Operations, and I have a personal message as well." "From Adam's father." "From his father?" Jenny repeated, still struggling to make sense of what was happening. "Master Sergeant James Thompson," the colonel confirmed. "One of the finest soldiers under my command." The past tense landed with unmistakable finality. An awful understanding began to dawn. Jenny looked from the colonel to the envelope and back again. "Is his father?" "He fell in Afghanistan 2 months ago," Colonel Reeves said, his voice professional but not without emotion. "In his final letter home, he asked us to find the woman at the diner who had been feeding his son. Adam had mentioned you in his letters." The diner had fallen completely silent. Even the sounds of the kitchen had stilled as Kathy and the dishwasher emerged to listen. "What Sergeant Thompson didn't know," the colonel continued, "was that his wife had left shortly after his deployment, abandoning Adam. The boy was too proud, too afraid of being taken from his home to tell anyone. He managed alone, using the small emergency fund his father had left, making meals stretch beyond imagination." A collective murmur of shock rippled through the diner. Jenny felt her heart constricting as she imagined Adam, the careful eyes, the too big backpack, the way he savored each bite of food, trying to survive alone, waiting for a father who would never return. In his final letter, Colonel Reeves said, removing a handwritten page from the envelope, "Sergeant Thompson wrote, if anything happens to me, please find the woman named Jenny at the diner who feeds Adam breakfast." He wrote about her in his letters. Said she never made him feel like charity, never asked questions he couldn't answer. Tell her she didn't just feed a hungry child, she preserved the dignity of a soldier's son. Tears blurred Jenny's vision as she accepted the letter, the paper somehow both weightless and unbearably heavy in her hands. Through the haze, she noticed Maxwell Reed watching her with an intensity that seemed almost personal. "When I read about what you did," he said quietly, "I recognized something I hadn't seen in a very long time. Something I thought this town had lost forever." Colonel Reeves straightened to his full height, snapped to attention, and rendered a formal salute, a gesture of profound respect rarely given to civilians. Behind him, every military person present did the same. On behalf of the United States Army Special Forces, the brothers in arms of Master Sergeant Thompson, and most importantly, on behalf of Adam, thank you. Jenny stood frozen, the letter trembling in her hands, overwhelmed by the knowledge that her simple acts of kindness had meant so much to a boy living through unimaginable circumstances, to a father fighting his last battles far from home. "I didn't know," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just couldn't let him go hungry." The colonel nodded. "Sometimes that's enough, Miss Millers. Sometimes feeding a hungry child without asking why they're hungry is the greatest kindness of all." Maxwell Reed stepped forward then, his presence commanding yet somehow gentle. "I need to tell you why I'm here," he said. "It's not just because of Adam, though that would be reason enough." He gestured toward a booth. "May we sit?" Jenny nodded, still dazed. The colonel excused himself, moving to speak quietly with Mark near the register, while Jenny slid into the booth across from Maxwell Reed. Up close, she could see the fatigue lines around his eyes, the subtle signs of humanity beneath the polished exterior. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small, worn photograph, placing it carefully on the table between them. "Do you recognize her?" he asked quietly. Jenny studied the faded image, a woman with tired eyes and a gentle smile, wearing a simple dress and a butterfly-shaped brooch. Recognition dawned slowly, like a sun rising through fog. "Mrs. Reed," she breathed. "She worked at the pharmacy downstairs from my apartment. She used to give me peppermints when I was little." Maxwell nodded, something like relief crossing his features. "My mother, Eleanor Reed. She was always kind to me," Jenny said, memories surfacing now. "After my parents died, when I moved in with my aunt, Mrs. Reed would sometimes leave bags of groceries at our door. She never said anything about it, but I knew it was her." "That sounds like Mom," Maxwell said, his voice softening. "She raised me alone after my father left. Worked 3 jobs sometimes. There were weeks when we ate nothing but macaroni and government cheese. But she never let anyone go hungry if she could help it." He touched the photograph gently. 25 years ago, I was a 12-year-old boy in this town. Hungry. Angry. Certain that no one saw me, that no one cared. But there was a woman at the pharmacy who noticed. Who started accidentally packing extra sandwiches in her lunch bag. Understanding bloomed in Jenny's chest, a warm, expanding realization. "Your mother," she whispered. Maxwell nodded. "For 2 years, she fed me without making me feel like a charity case. Those sandwiches kept me alive some days, but her kindness, the dignity she allowed me to keep, that saved something else in me. Something more important. He looked up, meeting Jenny's gaze directly. When I read that Facebook post mocking you for leaving food for an imaginary charity case, I knew I had to come back. Not just because my mother would have been ashamed of what this town has become, but because I recognized in you what she taught me, that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone who's hungry isn't just food, it's the space to be hungry without shame. Tears spilled silently down Jenny's cheeks. I didn't know his name. I didn't know his story. I just knew he needed help. That's exactly what makes it so important, Maxwell said. You didn't need his story to see his worth. He reached into his jacket again and withdrew a small blue envelope. My mother passed away last year. Her final wish was that I'd use what I built to honor what she taught me. When Colonel Reeves contacted me about what you'd done for Sergeant Thompson's son, I knew this was where it had to start. Jenny stared at the envelope, not reaching for it. This isn't charity, Maxwell said, seeming to read her hesitation. This is an investment in the kind of world my mother believed in. The kind you clearly believe in too. From the corner of her eye, Jenny could see the diner had come back to life, the Colonel speaking with Mark, customers whispering among themselves, Kathy watching from behind the counter with uncharacteristic softness in her expression. I own Reed Technologies, Maxwell continued when Jenny remained silent. You probably never heard of it. We make components for cellular networks, nothing glamorous. But it's grown beyond anything I imagined when I left this town at 18 with $40 and my mother's blessing. He slid the envelope toward her. I'd like to establish the Eleanor and Jenny Foundation. $1 million to start a program ensuring that no child in this county goes hungry, particularly the children of deployed military personnel. Jenny's head jerked up, certain she'd misheard. 1 million. That's just the beginning, Maxwell said. I've also purchased this diner with Mark's blessing. It will remain Rosie's, but with a new mission. Every child who needs a meal will get one, no questions asked. And I'd like you to run it, if you'll accept. Jenny's hands flew to her mouth. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Maxwell smiled, a genuine warmth reaching his eyes. My mother always believed that sometimes all it takes to change a life is one person who notices. You noticed Adam. My mother noticed me. This is how we keep that chain unbroken. The diner had fallen silent again, everyone watching this extraordinary scene unfold. Jenny felt the weight of their attention, but for once, it didn't make her want to disappear. Why me? She asked softly. You could hire anyone. Maxwell's expression turned serious. Because you already understand the most important thing, that kindness without dignity isn't kindness at all. That's not something I can teach. That's something you either know in your bones or you don't. He glanced around the diner, at the faces watching them with varying degrees of awe and skepticism. This town forgot what it means to take care of its own, he said, his voice carrying easily in the silence. I'm hoping you'll help me remind them. The week following the Colonel's visit and Reed's announcement transformed Rosie's diner in ways no one could have predicted. The story spread through town like wildfire, jumping from conversation to social media to local newspapers, then national news. The Facebook group that had mocked Jenny's charity case now shared a heartfelt retelling of Master Sergeant Thompson's letter and Reed's unexpected intervention, gathering hundreds of thousands of shares and supportive comments. By Wednesday, camera crews from 3 different networks had set up outside the diner. Jenny, uncomfortable with the attention, had initially refused interviews, but Maxwell convinced her that their story could inspire others. If even one person sees this and decides to notice someone else's hunger, whatever kind of hunger it might be, isn't that worth a few uncomfortable minutes on camera? He'd asked. She'd relented, and the resulting segment on Good Morning America, featuring interviews with Jenny, Maxwell Reed, and via video call, a shy but smiling Adam, had gone viral within hours. The diner itself had become something of a pilgrimage site. Veterans drove from neighboring states to have coffee at the counter. Local families who had previously ignored Jenny now waited patiently for her tables. Mark, who had initially grudged Jenny's free pancakes, hung a small American flag beside the booth where Adam had sat. Beneath it, he placed a discreet plaque, reserved for those who serve and the families who wait. That booth was never empty again, occupied by veterans, active duty personnel passing through town, and occasionally by families clearly struggling but treated with quiet dignity by the staff. More profound than the public attention were the private changes. Jenny moved from her drafty apartment to a small but comfortable house closer to the diner, purchased with part of the salary Maxwell insisted on paying her as the new manager. For the first time in her adult life, she didn't need to count pennies to make rent or choose between electricity and dental care. The Eleanor and Jenny Foundation took shape with surprising speed, establishing food security programs in schools throughout the county. Maxwell had assembled a team of experts who worked from a previously vacant storefront next to the diner, transforming the space into a modern office where local families could access resources without bureaucratic hurdles. But perhaps the most meaningful change came in the attitudes of the townspeople themselves. The Pay It Forward program Maxwell had implemented, where customers could purchase meals in advance for those who might need them, had initially been met with skepticism. "That'll just attract more freeloaders," one regular had grumbled. Yet within days, the wall near the register filled with paid tickets, each representing a meal available to anyone in need. Teachers purchased breakfasts for students they suspected might not eat otherwise. The local trucking company bought 50 lunches for veterans. Even Harold, living on a fixed income, added an extra $1 to his bill each day. Not much, but it adds up, he'd say with quiet pride. Jenny watched it all with a sense of wonder. The same community that had mocked her kindness now embraced it as a point of civic pride. Rosie's model became shorthand for programs in neighboring towns seeking to address food insecurity with dignity rather than humiliation. One rainy Tuesday, Jenny arrived to find Maxwell waiting outside the diner, leaning against his Lamborghini with an umbrella in hand. "That car looks ridiculous here," she said, accepting the shelter of his umbrella with a smile that would have surprised her former self with its ease. "I know," he admitted, walking her to the door. "I'm thinking of getting something more practical. Maybe that old Ford pickup Harold's been trying to sell." Inside, as they shook off the rain, Maxwell grew serious. "I have news," he said. "The Army located Adam's mother." Jenny froze in the act of hanging her coat. "Is she coming back for him?" Maxwell shook his head. "She's remarried, has a new family in Arizona. She signed away her parental rights yesterday. Adam's grandparents will adopt him formally now." Relief and sadness mingled in Jenny's chest. "Does he know?" "Yes. Colonel Reeves flew out to tell him personally." Maxwell hesitated. "There's something else." Adam asked if he could visit. "His grandparents are bringing him next weekend." The news sent a jolt of nervous anticipation through Jenny. "Here?" "To the diner." "To see you," Maxwell clarified gently. "You're important to him, Jenny." More than you realize. She thought of the quiet boy with the too big backpack, the careful eyes, the way he'd savored each bite of food she brought him. She thought of his father, writing home about a waitress who fed his son without asking questions. And she thought of her own father, sharing rations with a child whose name he never knew. "I'd like that," she said finally. "I'd like that very much." Maxwell studied her face, his expression softening. "You know, when I first came back to this town, I was full of bitterness for how hard it had been, for how little support we'd had. I wanted to prove something. To show everyone who'd overlooked us what they'd missed. And now?" Jenny asked, noting the past tense. He smiled, a genuine warmth that transformed his features. "Now I think I just want to build something my mother would be proud of. Something that might make this place a little more like what she always believed it could be." Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through clouds, casting the diner in golden light. Maxwell touched Jenny's shoulder briefly, a gesture of respect rather than familiarity, before heading to a meeting with the foundation team next door. Jenny watched him go, then turned to the diner, seeing it with new eyes, not as the place where she'd worked for years to barely survive, but as a space where something profound had taken root. Something that might, with care and attention, continue to grow. On the 7th day after the Colonel's visit, a manila envelope arrived addressed to Jenny. Inside was a handwritten letter on lined notebook paper, the carefully formed letters betraying the youth of its author. "Dear Miss Jenny, I didn't know your name until that day the Colonel came to find you, but every morning for those months, you were the only person who looked at me like I wasn't invisible or broken. Dad always told me that real heroes don't wear capes, they wear the uniform, but I think sometimes they wear aprons too. When Dad stopped writing, I thought the world had forgotten both of us, but you remembered me every day, even when I couldn't tell you why I was alone. Grandma and Grandpa are nice. They're teaching me to fish, and Grandma makes good cookies, but I miss Dad, and sometimes I miss your pancakes too. Thank you for not asking questions when I couldn't answer them. Your friend, Adam Thompson. P.S. I finished the book I was reading. It had a happy ending after all." Jenny framed the letter and hung it behind the counter, not prominently, not for show, but as a personal reminder of why small kindnesses matter. When customers asked about it, she would simply smile and say, "Just a thank you note from a special customer." The weekend of Adam's visit arrived with a nervous energy Jenny hadn't felt in years. She spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing her outfit, settling finally on a simple blue dress she'd bought with her first real paycheck as manager, and arrived at the diner 2 hours early to prepare everything herself. "It's just pancakes," Kathy said, watching Jenny meticulously measure ingredients. "You've made them 1,000 times. They need to be perfect," Jenny insisted, and Kathy, understanding more than she let on, simply nodded and left her to it. At precisely 10 a.m., a modest SUV pulled into the parking lot. Jenny watched through the window as an elderly couple emerged first, then helped a small figure from the back seat. Adam looked both the same and different, the same serious eyes, the same careful movements, but his clothes were new, his posture a fraction less guarded. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The diner, unusually full for a Saturday morning, fell quiet as patrons recognized the boy from the news stories. Adam scanned the room, his gaze finding Jenny immediately. For a moment, neither moved. Then Adam broke into a run, covering the distance between them in seconds, wrapping his arms around her waist with unexpected fierceness. Jenny knelt, returning his embrace, feeling his thin shoulders shake with silent tears. "I'm sorry I didn't say goodbye," he whispered against her shoulder. "It's okay," Jenny assured him, her own voice thick with emotion. "You're here now." Adam's grandparents introduced themselves: John and Martha Thompson, James's parents, their faces lined with grief but their eyes kind. "We can never thank you enough," Martha said, clasping Jenny's hand. "Not just for feeding him, but for giving him a safe place when the world was falling apart." They settled into what had become known as Adam's booth, now adorned with the plaque and flag. The diner returned to its normal hum of activity, though Jenny noticed many customers stealing glances their way, curiosity mingled with respect. "I made your usual," Jenny said, setting a plate of pancakes before Adam. "Extra butter, light on the syrup." Adam smiled, a real smile that transformed his solemn face. "You remembered." "Of course I did," Jenny said, surprised to find her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. Throughout the meal, Adam gradually relaxed, even sharing stories about his new school in Colorado and the dog his grandparents had adopted. "His name is Sergeant," he confided, after Dad. As they prepared to leave, Maxwell arrived, having timed his appearance to give them privacy for their reunion. He'd traded the Lamborghini for a modest sedan, Jenny noted with approval. Adam eyed him curiously as introductions were made. "Mr. Reed is the one who helped set up the foundation," Jenny explained. "So other kids like you don't have to be hungry or alone." Adam considered this. "Were you hungry when you were a kid?" he asked Maxwell directly, with the unfiltered honesty of children. Maxwell smiled, not condescending but genuine. "Yes," he said simply. "Very hungry sometimes. That's why what Miss Jenny did for you matters so much to me." Adam nodded, satisfied with this answer. "Dad said you can tell a lot about people by whether they notice when others are hungry." He glanced at Jenny. "Not just for food." As they said their goodbyes with promises of future visits, perhaps when school let out for summer, Jenny felt a curious sense of completion. Not an ending, but the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. 3 months later, the Eleanor and Jenny Foundation hosted its first official fundraiser. The diner was transformed for the evening: white tablecloths over the formica tables, soft lighting instead of the usual fluorescence. Local businesses had donated lavishly for the silent auction. Even the mayor attended, eager to associate himself with what had become a point of community pride. But the most meaningful moment came when Jenny unveiled the new sign that would hang above the diner's entrance: "The Eleanor and James Cafe at Rosie's Diner," honoring both Maxwell's mother and Adam's father. "This place has always been more than just somewhere to eat," Jenny said in her brief remarks, uncomfortable with public speaking but determined to honor what had been created. "It's where we see each other, really see each other across all the things that might divide us. Hunger, loneliness, grief, these don't care about your politics or your position. They're the great equalizers." She glanced at Maxwell, who nodded encouragement, and at Adam, seated with his grandparents at the counter. "What started with one plate of pancakes has grown into something I never could have imagined," she continued. "But the principle remains the same: everyone deserves to be fed, and no one deserves to be ashamed of their hunger." Later that night, after the guests had departed and the diner returned to its familiar self, Jenny found a small box on her desk. Inside was a challenge coin, the special token carried by military personnel, usually given only to those within their units. One side bore the insignia of the Special Forces, the other had been custom engraved: "Semper Memor, always remembering." A note accompanied it in Adam's careful handwriting. Colonel Reeves said this was from Dad's unit. He said you earned it? Jenny slipped the coin into her pocket, its weight a comforting reminder that kindness offered without expectation sometimes returns in unexpected ways. There's a particular kind of hunger that has nothing to do with food. It gnaws at you from the inside, the hunger to be seen, to matter, to know that your existence registers in someone else's heart. This is the hunger that Jenny recognized in Adam, that Eleanor Reed saw in young Maxwell, that Sergeant Thompson acknowledged in the children he encountered halfway around the world. It's the hunger we all carry, though some bear it more visibly than others. The true measure of our humanity isn't found in grand gestures or public declarations. It lives in those quiet moments when no one is watching, when we choose to extend ourselves toward another's pain without requiring their story as payment. Jenny didn't need Adam's history to offer him pancakes. She recognized hunger, and she responded with bread, not questions. In a world that increasingly demands credentials for compassion, proof that someone's suffering is legitimate, that their need is real, that they've done everything possible to help themselves before daring to ask for help, there is profound radicalism in unconditional kindness. In saying, through our actions, you don't have to earn the right to be treated with dignity. You don't have to prove your hunger is real before I offer you food. This is the legacy worth building, not in buildings that bear our names or fortunes that outlast us, but in the chain of kindness that connects us across generations, circumstances, and differences. One meal, one smile, one moment of being truly seen at a time. This story might fade from your memory in the coming days. The waitress, the boy, the soldier, the billionaire who remembered his own hunger. The details might blur, the names slip away. But perhaps the next time you see someone whose hunger is showing, whether it's physical hunger or the deeper hunger for acknowledgement, for dignity, for connection, you'll remember the essence of what happened in that small Kansas diner. You might not have $1 million to establish a foundation. You might not own a Lamborghini to auction for charity. But you have what Jenny had, the ability to see beyond your own circumstances, to recognize humanity in unexpected places, to offer what you can without requiring stories in return. Today, notice someone's hunger. It might be the cashier whose smile never reaches her eyes, the elderly neighbor who lingers in conversation because the silence of his apartment awaits, the child whose too big clothes speak of hand-me-downs and making do. Notice, and then respond, not with the grandiosity of someone seeking recognition, but with the quiet certainty that feeding another's hunger, in whatever form it takes, is reason enough. Because in the end, we are all just passing through this world, all carrying our own hungers, all hoping to be seen. And sometimes, a plate of pancakes is more than food. Sometimes, it's a lifeline thrown across the void that separates us, saying simply, I see you. You matter. You are not alone.